The night was thick with fog, the kind that swallowed sound and blurred reality. Thomas Gray said, "Stories like this don't just appear out of thin air." He traced his finger along a yellowed newspaper clipping. The words whispered of a warship that vanished and reappeared in a blaze of green lightning. His eyes burned with curiosity, and his mind throbbed with restless need. The USS Eldridge, the headline screamed from the past, still haunting the present. Rumors stretched across decades, twisting in taverns, whispered in Navy halls, and scattered through conspiracy books that fed hungry minds. Emily Carter said, "You'll never find peace chasing shadows, Thomas." But Thomas refused calm, searching for cracks where truth might seep through lies. He leaned back, staring into smoke curling from his lamp. His obsession carved distance between himself and everyone else. For him, discovery was salvation, and silence was torment. The fog outside pressed against the glass like a warning, but he welcomed it. "If no one else will face it," Thomas said, "then I will." His pulse quickened with resolve as the room darkened into memory's grip. Morning light broke weakly through the haze, as if the world itself wanted to hide from what Thomas sought. He scanned through naval logs, most of them censored, thick black bars cutting truth into silence. Emily poured coffee, her silence a reminder of her doubt. "You think they erase this because of secrecy, not because it's fantasy?" she asked. Thomas said, "Erasure is proof of existence." The logs carried numbers, coordinates, and scattered anomalies. His pencil scribbled furiously, chasing ghosts in ink. The city beyond the window stirred, car horns muffled by lingering fog. But Thomas felt no world existed outside his papers. He was trapped between rumor and proof. The Eldridge wasn't just a myth to him, it was a fracture in history. By noon, Thomas pinned fresh documents to his wall. Each scrap of evidence tangled into a web only he could understand. Emily said, "You're building a shrine to madness." He ignored her words, hearing instead the echo of whispers about sailors fused into steel. His hand trembled as he clipped another photograph of the Eldridge under a storm. The truth, he believed, had left scars no censorship could erase. He whispered, "They tried to hide it, but the sea remembers." That evening, Emily's patience thinned as Thomas traced coordinates across a map. "Ottawa. They'll come after you if you push too far," she warned. He said, "Then let them come. Truth demands pursuit." His obsession grew sharper, edges of sanity blurring. His world no longer held meals, laughter, or comfort. It was ink, maps, and silence thick enough to strangle. Night returned heavy with fog, thicker than before. Thomas stood at the window, staring into the mist like it might reveal secrets. Emily whispered, "What if the truth destroys you?" He said, "Better to be destroyed by truth than to live in lies." His reflection in the glass merged with the fog, blurring man and myth. Outside, the street lamp flickered, and the silence deepened into something unnatural. The library smelled of dust and secrets, shelves stacked with forgotten war records. Thomas Gray said, "The answers are here, buried in ink." He combed through thick Navy files, their weight heavy in his hands. Black bars covered too many lines, silence etched into official pages. Emily Carter whispered, "You're chasing ghosts, not facts." But Thomas shook his head, driven by fire that drowned her doubt. He scribbled notes, his pencil scratching like claws tearing paper. His pulse echoed in his ears, louder than the turning pages. Photographs of ships blurred into shadows of storms, and words twisted into warnings. Each redacted line was not absence, but proof of deliberate concealment. His obsession grew stronger, fed by the censorship itself. The silence in the room felt alive, thick enough to breathe. Hours slipped unnoticed as Thomas lost himself in fragments of testimony. A sailor's note described men walking through steel before the words vanished under censorship. His chest tightened with a mix of fear and hunger for truth. Emily said, "Even if this happened, why expose it?" Thomas replied, "Because silence is a lie." His pencil underlined every anomaly, every whispered detail. The page grew crowded with arrows and notes, his mind spinning connections no one else could see. The quiet hum of the library felt like the heartbeat of the secret itself, pulsing with unease. His obsession turned the room into a battlefield between fact and denial. By dusk, Thomas pinned sailor testimonies alongside naval reports, creating a wall of contradictions. Emily stood silent, her arms folded, torn between disbelief and concern. He whispered, "They fused men into the ship." His voice trembled with awe and terror. Emily said, "You're letting rumors swallow you whole." He ignored her warning, staring at blurred photographs of men who looked broken by what they had seen. His eyes gleamed with determination, as if he stood on the brink of revelation. The study became his sanctuary and his prison, every page a new chain binding him deeper to the mystery. Late night again, and the city outside had gone quiet, but Thomas still traced coordinates across his maps. He circled Norfolk, Charleston, Philadelphia, as if the truth was hidden between ports. Emily said, "Your eyes are burning out, Thomas." He snapped, "I see clearer than ever." She stepped back, afraid of the obsession now consuming him. The fog outside pressed against the windows like a living thing, as if listening. He pressed his pencil down, lines scratching across paper, his hand trembling. Every mark felt like a step closer to an abyss he could no longer resist. Midnight cloaked the world when Thomas finally leaned back, his eyes hollow but burning. He whispered, "This isn't conspiracy, Emily. It's evidence." She shook her head, her silence louder than words. His wall of papers loomed a monument to obsession. The fog outside swallowed the street, leaving only a faint flicker of the lamppost. He pressed his palm against the glass, watching his reflection merge with the mist. The boundaries between him and the mystery blurred. Emily whispered, "You're losing yourself." Thomas replied, "To find the truth one must first vanish." His voice echoed, almost swallowed by the fog's heavy silence. Rain hammered the streets as Thomas Gray walked through alleys that smelled of rust and secrets. He clutched a folder tight under his coat, papers threatening to escape into the storm. A shadow leaned against a lamppost, waiting. The figure's voice cut through the rain, "Looking for truth will drown you before the sea does." Thomas's heart pounded as he faced a stranger cloaked in black, eyes sharp and unreadable. Emily Carter followed reluctantly, her steps slower, her voice trembling. "Thomas, we should be here," he said. "Truth hides where fear lives." The figure slipped him a paper, its ink smeared but legible, coordinates and dates. The storm howled like it knew secrets had been passed. Emily grabbed his arm, whispering, "This is a trap." Thomas clenched the paper tighter, his voice steady, "Or it's the key we need." Inside a smoky bar hidden at the city's edge, Thomas studied the coordinates scrawled across damp paper. The informant watched him from the corner, sipping whiskey, eyes never blinking. Emily whispered, "Why trust someone who hides in shadows?" Thomas said, "Because shadows are where secrets survive." The bar's dim light cast long lines across wooden tables, worn with years of stories. Thomas's finger traced the coordinates, his breath shallow, his mind racing. The informant muttered, "Some things are not meant to be unearthed." His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed fear. Emily clenched her fists, whispering, "We should leave before this swallows us." Thomas looked at her with fire in his eyes. "We've already been swallowed." The night grew heavier as Thomas pinned new notes to his wall, back in the study. The coordinates matched naval ports, strange patterns circling back to Philadelphia. Emily said, "This is madness stitched into paper." He ignored her words, eyes glowing with obsession. Every arrow pointed to silence, every mark to something deliberately erased. A whisper echoed in his head, the informant's warning. "Some truths bleed." His hands trembled as he stepped back, the wall looking like a map of conspiracy. Emily's voice broke the silence. "How far are you willing to go?" Thomas whispered. "As far as it takes." His shadow stretched long behind him, merging with the papers, as if even the walls had become part of the secret. At a quiet diner on the edge of the city, Thomas met another figure, a Navy veteran with haunted eyes. The man said, "We saw lightning swallow the ship." His voice cracked under weight of memory. Emily looked horrified, her coffee untouched, her hands trembling slightly. Thomas leaned forward. "Tell me what you saw." The veteran whispered, "Men screaming inside metal, vanishing before my eyes." His eyes watered, his body shaking. Emily whispered, "Stop, Thomas, stop." But Thomas pressed on, his pencil scratching every detail into his notebook. The veteran's silence after his confession was heavier than the words. Rain tapped against the window, reminding them the storm outside was still alive. Back in the study, Thomas stared at his notebook, replaying the veteran's words. His pulse raced as if he had glimpsed truth itself. Emily whispered, "These stories are curses, not answers." But Thomas felt alive, his obsession now fused with purpose. He pinned the final note to the wall, a quote that echoed in his head, "Men screaming inside metal." His hand lingered against the paper as his reflection in the window blurred into the fog outside. Emily placed her hand gently on his shoulder, her voice breaking. "Please don't let this consume you." He said, "It already has." The fog beyond the glass thickened, wrapping the city in silence, as if guarding the secrets he sought. The university archive waited like a mausoleum of facts, and the air tasted of varnish and dust. Dr. Lionel Hart said, "Myths grow where records thin." His smile was tidy, but his eyes measured every breath. Thomas Gray said, "I want access to the wartime experiments, not museum tours." Hart slid a folder across the table, the pages crisp and almost too clean. Emily Carter said, "If this is everything, why does it feel curated?" Hart chuckled softly and said, "Selection is the duty of scholars." The lights hummed, and a clock clicked with smug precision as silence pooled. Thomas scanned the pages and found tidy explanations of degaussing and radar haze. He felt truth dodging between the lines, like a swift fish avoiding the net. Hart said, "Invisibility is a metaphor for morale." The word metaphor struck like a lid, snapping shut over a box that still rattled. In the corridor, a man with a friendly grin appeared as if from a side door no one saw. Aaron Blake said, "Hart keeps the good boxes downstairs." Thomas Gray said, "And you keep the keys." Aaron winked and said, "Only for friends of the truth." Emily Carter watched his hands instead of his smile, and her voice was calm. She said, "Friends ask for trust before offering favors." Aaron laughed, low and easy, and the sound slipped along the tile like oil. He led them past framed portraits whose eyes seemed to follow. The stairwell smelled of damp stone and old paint as the lights buzzed. Thomas felt the bait glittering and still wanted to bite. Aaron said, "Here's where the rumors end and records begin." The door at the bottom waited with a new lock that looked recently polished. The boxes downstairs offered tidy truths with tidy stamps, and something about the neatness felt untrue. Thomas Gray said, "These seals are fresh, not wartime." Emily Carter whispered, "Staged files, staged history." Aaron Blake said, "You wanted proof, not theater critics." Thomas lifted a photo and smelled fresh toner, trying to pretend to be old. A note referenced a port log that contradicted 3 earlier dates by a hair. He felt a hand guiding him in circles, not forward. Emily said, "Who benefits if we leave satisfied?" Aaron smiled without teeth and said, "You do, because sleep returns." Thunder crawled over the city as if debating where to land. Thomas tucked a forged sheet into his coat, a splinter he meant to keep. They reconvened in Hart's office, where the rain had thickened into veils on the glass. Dr. Lionel Hart said, "You see how rumors breed from misfiled jargon." Thomas Gray said, "I see how certainties dress themselves." Emily Carter said, "We found new seals on old history." Hart folded his hands like a patient priest and said, "Preservation demands intervention." The word intervention felt like a razor dressed as etiquette. Thomas set the forged sheet on the desk and watched Hart's eyes harden a shade. Hart said, "Forgery is common among enthusiasts." Emily said, "Then why does the forgery match your catalog code?" The room cooled as the vent sighed, and the lamp threw a stricter shadow. Thomas sensed the pivot of power, and knew the door would be guarded next time. Back at the study, the wall of notes had shifted by degrees that only obsession could measure. Thomas Gray said, "Someone copied the pattern and put it back wrong." Emily Carter said, "Then someone has a key, or a friend with one." The lamp hummed, and fog pressed the window like a slow tide reclaiming shore. Thomas traced a red string that now skipped a photograph it once crossed. Aaron Blake's card sat on the desk, innocent as a smile. Emily said, "He let us down and left us satisfied but uncertain." Thomas said, "Heart wants doubt, gentle, not defeated." He pulled the forged sheet from his coat and slid it under a book. The room seemed to lean as if listening for the next line in a story. Thomas said, "We stop asking permission, and we start knocking down walls." The old dockyard reeked of salt and rust, where forgotten ships groaned against chains. Thomas Gray said, "This is where truth leaves its scars." He ran his hand over a weathered hull, paint flaking like memories too long buried. Emily Carter said, "It feels cursed, Thomas. The air itself is wrong." Her voice trembled, her breath misting in the damp fog. A lone figure waited at the pier, shoulders slumped under a torn coat. Samuel Reed said, "My brother was on that ship. He never came home." His eyes carried storms long past but never quieted. Thomas stepped closer, heart thudding with dread and fascination. Samuel's hand shook as he held a locket, the metal worn smooth by grief. Emily whispered, "This is not history. It's grief alive." The waves slammed against the pier, as though echoing Samuel's unspoken agony. Thomas said, "Then his story is the key we've missed." Inside a weathered shack near the docks, Samuel laid out letters stained with salt and time. He said, he wrote of voices inside the steel, of men disappearing before his eyes. Thomas Gray leaned in, scanning the fading words like sacred scripture. Emily Carter said, "These sound like madness, not memory." But Samuel's tears fell onto the pages, smearing the ink. He whispered, "Madness doesn't keep you awake 70 years. The lamplight flickered, shadows trembling across cracked walls. Thomas clenched his fists, whispering, they left him trapped in silence. Emily turned away, her hands covering her face. Samuel said, "The sea never gave him back, but the sea still whispers his name." The air felt heavier, every breath pressed by sorrow older than them all. The study wall bore Samuel's letters now, pinned between maps and photographs. Thomas Gray said, "This tragedy isn't rumor. It's the wound beneath the scar." Emily Carter said, "And wounds like this never heal." Her voice cracked with sorrow. Samuel sat silently in the corner, his eyes locked on the locket in his palm. He whispered, he was 19, still writing songs on scraps of paper. Thomas pressed his palm against the notes, his jaw clenched. He said, "Then his voice will guide us further." The fog pressed harder against the window, merging past and present into one suffocating silence. Emily whispered, "You're binding grief to obsession." Thomas turned, his face pale and rigid. "It's not obsession, Emily," he said. "It's justice for the forgotten." Samuel's voice broke as he recalled his brother's last shore leave. He said the sea wanted him, and he laughed it off. His shoulders shook as he gripped the locket. Emily Carter's eyes filled with tears, whispering, "This isn't a mystery, Thomas. It's cruelty dressed as science." Thomas Gray's voice was hard, resolute. "And cruelty must be dragged into the light." The room felt like a confessional, each word cutting open wounds. Samuel whispered, "Sometimes the truth isn't freedom, it's another prison." Thunder rolled outside, rattling the glass panes. Emily placed her hand on Samuel's shoulder, her lips trembling as she said, "You've carried this longer than anyone should." His silence was heavy, the kind that pulled all voices into it. The storm deepened, as if echoing Samuel's grief. Thomas Gray stood by the window, staring into sheets of rain. He said, "The experiment broke more than men. It broke time, It broke silence. Emily Carter whispered, "And now it's breaking you." Thomas turned, his eyes hollow but blazing. "If truth costs me, then so be it," he said. Samuel Reed lifted his gaze, whispering, "Then carry my brother's voice with you, so his death matters." The room fell into silence, except for the storm battering the glass. Emily closed her notebook slowly, her hands trembling, as if accepting the weight they now carried. Thomas pressed his palm against the locket Samuel offered. "He won't be forgotten," he vowed. The fog outside swallowed the street, leaving only shadows flickering against the lightning. The study air felt heavy, like the fog had crawled inside and taken root. Thomas Gray said, "We've been guided, but not by truth, by a hand steering us away." Emily Carter said, "You mean Blake." Her tone was brittle, her eyes shot. Thomas nodded, slamming his palm against the desk. "He gave us false doors, polished lies." The wall of notes now looked fractured, arrows leading in loops that mocked their search. Samuel Reed sat silently, locket still in his palm, whispering, "Even betrayal won't free my brother." Lightning lit the room, a white flash slicing across their faces. Emily said, "Then he's the deceiver, the one who smiled too easily." Thomas's jaw clenched as he said, "And I let him close enough to poison everything." At a quiet cafe, the next day, Aaron Blake appeared uninvited, his grin as polished as ever. "You've stirred ghosts from graves," he said, sliding into their booth. Thomas Gray's knuckles whitened against his coffee cup. Emily Carter leaned forward, voice like steel, "You fed us forgeries." Aaron chuckled, swirling his drink. "Forgeries keep stories alive longer than facts." Thomas's voice broke with anger. "You wanted us chasing smoke while you locked the fire away." Blake's eyes gleamed, his calm too rehearsed. "Maybe the fire burns too hot to touch." Samuel Reed sat apart, his silence trembling with rage, staring daggers at Blake. The cafe's neon flickered, throwing brief shadows across Blake's calm face. The argument spilled into the street, rain slicking the pavement under dim lamps. Thomas Gray grabbed Aaron Blake's arm, hissing, "Tell me where the real records are." Blake yanked free, his grin cracking into irritation. Emily Carter said, "You've lied long enough." Blake snapped back, "I've kept you safe from truths that will tear you apart." Samuel Reed finally shouted, voice raw, "Safe? My brother screamed inside steel because of men like you." The street fell silent, except for rain hammering metal gutters. Blake's mask of charm faltered, his eyes darting like a cornered animal. Thomas said coldly, "Then you'll show us, or the lies end tonight." They forced Blake into the warehouse near the docks, a cavern of rusted steel and shadows. Thomas Gray said, "This is where your story ends if you lie again." Blake's smirk returned faintly, but his voice trembled. "You don't know what you're asking for." Emily Carter held a lantern high, its light scattering across broken crates and chains. Samuel Reed whispered, "Every lie you spoke drags my brother deeper into silence." Thomas stepped closer, pressing Blake against a pillar, his face inches from his. "No more riddles," he said. Blake's laughter echoed, brittle and hollow. "You think you're close, but you're already lost." The fog seeped through the broken windows, thickening as though it listened. Back at the study, silence hung thicker than the storm outside. Thomas Gray stared at Blake's discarded words written in his notebook. "You're already lost." Emily Carter said, "He's broken you down piece by piece." Thomas shook his head slowly, eyes burning. "No, he's shown me where to look." Samuel Reed whispered, "If you're wrong, more ghosts will follow us." Thunder rattled the walls as Thomas pressed his hand against the map, pinned to the wall. "The lies point one way," he said. "The truth hides in the cracks between them." Emily's voice softened, pleading, "Don't let betrayal blind you." Thomas said, "Betrayal sharpens me, and tomorrow we tear down the last curtain." The shipyard was drowned in mist, steel skeletons looming like ghosts of war. Thomas Gray said, "This is where it began, and where it must end." Emily Carter's voice trembled, "The fog feels alive." Samuel Reed clutched his locket, whispering, "He's here." Their breaths were visible, each one swallowed by the mist. The waves beat against iron hulls, a rhythm like a heart that refused to die. Lightning crackled faintly on the horizon, illuminating shadows that looked too human to be coincidence. Thomas's jaw set, his eyes locked on the void where the Eldridge had once anchored. Inside a hollow warehouse, papers and charts were scattered across a table, as though abandoned mid-thought. Dr. Lionel Hart waited, his calm composure fractured by shadows under his eyes. "You should have stayed blind," he said. Thomas Gray stepped closer, his voice hard. "The truth doesn't vanish just because you hide it." Emily Carter whispered, "All these deaths, all this silence, was it worth it?" Hart's hands shook as he adjusted his glasses, whispering, "Control is always worth the cost." Samuel Reed spat, "Tell that to the dead you buried in steel." The echoes swallowed his voice, making it sound like the walls themselves condemned Hart. The fog pressed through broken windows, swallowing the room in pale silence. Hart's voice trembled, "You don't understand. The experiment tore holes in more than steel." Thomas Gray's voice sharpened, "Then you sacrificed men to play God." Emily Carter said, "Truth doesn't justify cruelty." Hart snapped, "History demands sacrifice." Samuel Reed shouted, "My brother wasn't a sacrifice, he was a boy." His voice cracked, his body shaking as tears streamed. Thomas's fists slammed the table, scattering papers. "This ends with the truth, not your control." Hart's silence was heavier than denial, his eyes fixed on the storm outside. A sudden surge of green lightning lit the sky, spilling through the broken roof, painting their faces in eerie glow. The air buzzed with static, humming like a chorus of trapped voices. Thomas Gray whispered, "It's happening again." Emily Carter clutched his arm, eyes wide with fear. Samuel Reed fell to his knees, screaming his brother's name into the storm. Hart's face contorted, torn between pride and terror. He muttered, "Proof. Undeniable proof." Thomas pulled Emily close, his voice iron. "This isn't proof. It's damnation." The steel walls rattled as if holding breath, waiting to collapse into silence or revelation. The storm collapsed into silence, leaving only the echo of Samuel's cries. The green light faded, and fog reclaimed the ruins, swallowing its secrets. Thomas Gray whispered, "We'll never know if we saw truth or illusion." Emily Carter said, "But we felt its cost." Samuel Reed pressed the locket to his chest, whispering, "He was here." Dr. Lionel Hart turned away, muttering, "The world will never be ready." Thomas's eyes burned with quiet fire. "The world deserves to know, ready or not." Outside, the fog thickened, carrying whispers that might have been wind, or might have been the lost voices of men swallowed by steel.